I gotta plug that in. We're really good at flipping houses. I suck at technology.
The best way to do this is hire a millennial. Here,
Google this.
I don't know what the hell to do.
I have to. I call one of Tim's kids and have them solve it. His oldest has died. Uncle Frank, what are you screwing up now? All right, we recording, Sarah? Cool. That's it. Get out of here. All right, easy enough. All right, so let me get into this. Okay, so you can head out. Thanks, Tim. So I think the easiest way to do this is, I'm not that smart. I went to a state school in Florida, and pictures are just easier to deal with. So, normally when I go through this, it just gives a good overview about what the business is, what it looks like, where it comes from, why I conceived it the way that it did. And now there's a lot of us. It's a lot for me. We got 11 people. But when I started, it was literally me, like out of the attic at my house, and I slowly grew it over time. But I'll get into kind of a story and a history of like how we got to this point. And I like it to be interactive. If there's questions, let me know. But by the end of this, what I hope to have is you'll have an understanding of, number one, why I started the business, the segment of the market that I want to penetrate, and how we're doing that. And then what you'll really understand is not only the segment of the market, what a deal looks like to us, what the exit strategies are. And the economy is important, but my economy is much more important. So what I wanted to set up when I built the business is, where are we during the economy where I can always make sure I have a good economy? And as a banker, you want me to have a good economy because I can pay it back. So those are the kind of things that we look at, if that makes sense. All right, so let's just jump into it. So what I started to learn over time is that
I've seen this chart.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's a very famous chart, and I ripped it myself off of the internet from Google. So like, you know, I take full responsibility for that. So the beauty of the chart is it just shows you cycles, locations, and it talks about recovery, expansion, hypersupply, and recession. And you're going to see this chart in different forms throughout this presentation. So I used to work at Ryan Homes. I worked there out of college. I went to the University of Florida, got a degree in construction management, and went to work at Ryan Homes in DC metro market. The reason I chose to go there was because I was a construction major. I grew up in a construction family, and they hired English majors and like marketing people. And I was like, well, I can kick all of their asses if I go there and work. In addition to that, most of my friends went to work in commercial construction. I didn't like commercial construction. I thought most of the people were jerks. And I was like, this is not where I want to surround myself every day. But the people on the residential side were cooler. They were nicer people. I just enjoyed it. Yeah. So I went to the DC metro market. I started off as a builder of houses. And then I worked my way up the flagpole. And as I did that, I got cross-trained. I did construction, I did costing, I did sales. Then I did management of construction, management of sales, and then I ran a profit center. I knew that it spoke to me personally to be in that side of the business, and I like the fact that I wouldn't have one skill like how to build. I have multiple skills. I know how to build, I know how to sell, I know how to estimate, and I know how to manage. And I learned all of those things for, I think, the best in class home builder in the US. 09 comes around and I'm miserable, like literally miserable. My division goes from, this stats in here, but it goes from 75 people to 23. There's a day in August of 2006 where I fire 30 something people in one day. Like, it's just miserable. So when real estate's a falling knife, and I watch NVR, who had $1 billion in cash, which I don't have $1 billion in cash, and I watch them get decimated. So I realized if I was going to go out on my own, I needed to have a couple of penetration points to the market, and I needed to be built stably. So if anything did happen in the market, I can participate in the up market, but I can participate in the down market. And one of the things I learned at NVR, if you know anything about them, Ryan Homes?
Yeah. Well,
globally.
I know at a high level.
Yeah.
We certainly look at a lot of deals where our developer is selling to them.
That's what they did. They went into bankruptcy. They came out of it, and the way that they emerged is they had a land light model. So they don't participate in the huge ups, but during the downs, during the last down, they only had one losing quarter, where most publicly traded builders had at least 3. Mm-hmm. So it's a slightly different model. I was born into that business, working there as a youngster, and it kind of taught me avoid the down. So I set this entire business up like that, and I wanted 4 different places to penetrate the market, which I'll talk about. Have you ever heard of a conference called IMN? That's not really as important as what the data they talk about. It was first started by SFR, which is single family residential, basically what Wall Street calls it. So 6 or 7 years ago, houses were no longer houses. First, they were a commodity, and then they became a trade. So during the last downturn, it was a commodity. It was a bond, and then the bond became a synthetic bond, and then it became a CDO, and all that is what eventually led us to like not just have a correction, like we had an overcorrection because it was screwed. Well, real estate got so low that Wall Street realized that there's a lot of new inventory built in the last 5 or 10 years that is underpriced to market because there's too much of it. So what they did is they stepped in and they bought hundreds of thousands of units, and they have what they call a buy box. And what that buy box is this is the year, it has to be this year or newer. It has to rent for X number of dollars based upon purchase price, and they basically produce this. And then this didn't just become something where they stuck a toe in, they jumped completely into it. So IMN services this part of the community, and for a non-banker like me, going to a conference like this, it gives me a chance to really understand like what they're doing, why they're doing, what the methodologies are. And then I've met people in the space, they're cool people, and they share it with us. Like, hey, we're going to Dallas, there's gonna be 40 of us talking about rentals. So I really kind of made myself a nerd around this certain aspect of business because I want to understand it. So the next slide kind of shows you, these are the sponsors' holdings, and I can email you the presentation too. In May of 2016, this is the snapshot. Invitation Homes had $5.3 billion in debt, all securitized by homes. Their debt was set between the end of 18 and beginning of 2020. If you look at each one of these, you'll number one see huge numbers in the debt column, and you'll see almost everything resets between Q4 2019 and Q1 of 2021. So what I think of is if 10% of the real estate market is owned by these people, which is pretty close to reality, there's no way in hell interest rates are going anywhere until that reset happens. So I started to notice that, and I also started to see, okay, like what are these people doing? Like, it's a trade. They're smarter than me. They went to Ivy League schools. They worked on Wall Street. Like, they're seeing a trade here. So I started to mimic some of their patterns from the hold perspective. Now, I don't have the fiscal ability or the footprint to cover 8 markets, but I do have the ability to cover Richmond. So I took some of these hybrids and I kind of molded it and used it here. So some of my takeaways, I just mentioned interest rates. Like, there is no doubt in my mind they're going to remain relatively constant. Now, I first used this slide in the presentation 18 months ago, and it's proved to be true to this point. They've stayed relatively flat. I mean, have you ever seen a period where interest rates have been A, this low, and B, this flat? It's insane. So in addition to that, a lot of people get their education through books. I get a lot of mine through actually working, networking, but I also read a ton. There's a book called The Great Crash, or This Time is Different. The Great Crash is a different book, but This Time is Different basically goes back 800 years. And what it relates to is, basically says this: everything goes through cycles. By the time there's a cycle, everyone's forgotten about everything that caused the last cycle. And they get euphoric again, which I think people are starting to do now. Like, oh, real estate can't lose. And they're starting to make silly purchases, and they're starting to do things based on the appreciation, not on the fundamentals. There's some time-honored traditions, that's one. There's fun things in the book, like Russia's always been corrupt. Like, they just got kicked out of the Olympics yesterday. But like, you go 700 years back, and these czars that ran Russia were just doing all kinds of crazy shit. But it's a really interesting read. It reads like a textbook, but basically says these things repeat themselves. That's going to be a theme. So this looks very similar to that first slide. You've seen this: recovery, expansion, hypersupply, and recession. I usually ask the question at this point here: where do you think we are now here in Richmond?
Hypersupply.
You think so?
Maybe an expansion.
Okay. Where do you think, Eddie?
I think we're in more recovery expansion right now. I don't think there's a hypersupply.
So we're going to look at what defines it. I think if you say Richmond, Virginia, I think Richmond, Virginia is an expansion. I think if you go to, what's the really overpriced community south of the river, Halsley?
Halsley.
I think Halsley is in hypersupply. I think it's ridiculous. Like, you can live in Halsley, or you can live in Short Pump, or excuse me, in Tyson's Corner in Northern Virginia, and it's the same price. Like, Tyson's Corner is a better spot than Halsley, but the prices are nutty there. But it's the same thing to ask this question. Is winter the same everywhere? Well, no. Winter in Anchorage, Alaska, and winter in Miami Beach are different. It's still the coldest part of their year. But you can wear shorts, Bermuda shorts in Miami during winter, and you can't do that in Anchorage. So I think even as the broader global market is at a point, I think there's sub-markets. And if I got into that specifically, like I would tell you that the Miami condo market, I think has gone through many of these phases. They're probably past hypersupply, maybe even to recession because they've got inventory standing. Houston was in hypersupply. Then it got flooded and it kind of receded all the way back to recovery. And now people are selling things at 20 cents on the dollar. It's a freaking mess. If you go up to the Pacific Northwest, you get into Portland or Seattle, you can literally put a sign in the front yard for house under contract for 150 grand. Somebody will buy it for 300. So like, to me, like that doesn't seem normal. Here in Richmond, the numbers are a little bit more pedestrian. I don't think we participated in huge ups. I don't think we had the huge downs. And it feels like we're just a relatively stable mid-market. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
So here are some of the things that define each segment. In recovery, there's high unemployment. That makes sense. We just came out of a recession. Consumption is reduced. Well, clearly, there's an decreased investment in building, land, factories, and machines because everyone just got decimated. Land prices are low. Interest rates are low. Now, I will say there's a caveat. Interest rates have been low for all of it. So I think in comparison to past markets, the interest rates are going to be an outlier. Vacancy is decreasing as rent is low and promoting growth. So during a recessionary period, people usually flock to rent. So in expansion, and this is why I think we're here, occupancy and rental rates raise, and they start to begin to exceed long-term averages, and that's the rental rates. Rental real estate profits raise, and this is the kind of thing where Frankie was an idiot because he had a corner office job and he quit it, and he went and flipped houses. But then I made 85 grand on on a really good house, and suddenly no one thought I was crazy anymore. Everyone wanted to do what I was doing. And that's kind of been like, I started to notice, like when I was doing this at first, it was me and two other dudes at an auction. Now there's like 300 people at an auction and they're overpaying because this has gotten to be a very, very popular thing to do. So that kind of defines the space. Higher profits attract new people. Fervor pushes new projects that'll go into the entitlement process. But if you've ever tried to get anything through entitlements here in Richmond, it can take forever. 3 to 5 years is pretty normal. So usually what happens is people catch up at the back end of the expansion. They've overdeveloped. Then my guess is, as you as bankers, what ends up happening is you end up back into a recessionary period. You have all this land that's developed. You have nobody that can actually perform on it because the market is kind of sitting. But that usually starts to happen during expansion. Am I on target? Do you agree? Okay. So then into expansion, unemployment continues to drop. Price of land is starting to raise slightly. Speculation is starting, and then the boom is on. So when you said you thought we were in hypersupply, I would say we're still in expansion, but we're starting to boom. And it could be any day now before we get to like stupidity, which I think is hypersupply. So hypersupply, occupancy rates exceed long-term averages. Upward pressure on rental breeds more development. And then during hypersupply, when things are as euphoric as humanly possible, is usually the first sign of trouble, and that's increase in unsold inventory. So everybody floods the market with inventory, and suddenly it's out of balance. And when that starts to happen, that then leads you to the recession. So if you look at it from this perspective, usually unsold inventory starts to increase. Do you have any idea, Eddie, where our unsold inventory is now in Richmond, what our average is? How many months?
I don't think we've even got a 2-month supply right now.
It's under 4.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure it's close to 3.
2.5, something like that.
Right.
It's hovered, and I think it's actually dropped down a little bit more in the past couple of months.
And it usually kind of tapers off because people pull things up the market in the fall and it picks back up.
Yeah.
We're in a very, very healthy market. But as you start to track inventory, and this is something we do internally, you start to see some tells. The other thing that happens is I get paid, the call I was on, you might have come in, is I get paid as a consultant. It's one of the things that's in my slide deck. And I work with people from about 40 states. And we're getting together next week in San Diego. Usually what you start to notice is these things start to happen first in the sand states. Florida, California, Nevada, Texas. So when they start talking about the market is changing, the market is softening, or inventory days are starting to go up, Arizona, you really start to pay attention because they usually lead us through these market cycles. So that's what I wanted to do, was network myself in a way where I could see not only Richmond, but nationally. So the second indicator, trouble, is occupancy falls. The third indicator is increasing in interest rates. Again, that might not be the same this time. We'll have to see. So this is just some ancillary factual data. Peak to trough unemployment usually lasts about 5 years, and it usually drops about 7%. So if you remember, we're now under 5% unemployment. I think we're actually under 4, and it peaked at just over 12. So there's a 7% spread. We've gone through the whole cycle. GDP decline usually lasts 1.9 years. Now, this is a global statistic. The US usually pulls this off inside of 2 quarters. So basically they get through a recession, and then we do some kind of stimulation, or we do something as a government to get us through it pretty fast. But there's typically a decrease of 9.3% in peak to trough. We are right at that. So do you have any idea, or has Eddie explained at all how we find our leads?
No,
All right.
no. Come up with blank slate.
All right. So what we do is we go direct to seller. Now, in a completely depressed market, the hedge fund boys can come in and they can literally just take over an MLS. They did it in Tampa, they did it in Miami, they did it in Arizona. They can do that. We bought a few things off the MLS, but we don't have the same bandwidth and the same finances. So what we do instead is we go direct to seller. We send out about 55,000 mail pieces every month. We're #1 on Google paid search if you're looking to sell a home, and then we run some other advertising as well. But we usually do it through mail, through telephone outbound, and through the internet. And we generate between 300 and 700 unique new leads every single month. That's what we do. We then take those 300 to 700 leads. Half of them do this and say, "Take me off your list." Every month, it's pretty common. And then it's not the same people, because we do take them off the list, but like enough. But the 200 to 400 that are left, what they end up doing is someone just say, "Look, I get your postcard every month. Now's not the right time." We have 3 full-time salespeople whose job it is, and they get paid to work the leads and get them to convert. And sometimes it takes 15, 16 months, and sometimes it takes 5 minutes. It's just a combination. Now, in any given month, we get somewhere between 10 and 30 deals under contract. In November, we put 55 under contract. So it's an enormous number.
Yeah.
So, but that's how we do it. But the way that it's set up is, if there is a downturn, usually the values, the house value, coupled with a banking crisis, the value usually drops by about 35%. But equity usually comes down by 55%. So what basically happens is people who aren't sophisticated panic. And when there's a down market, they sell down market. Like if you sold your Apple stock the day Steve Jobs died, that was a bad decision, because it's gone on like a 5x run, right? So but these people come into the market, they don't know what they're doing, they panic, they sell. We're there. Now, what I've learned about business and what I've learned about human emotion is bad decisions are recession proof. So the upside of that is there's always people who need someone to buy a home quickly because of some problem. And that's the need that we serve. Now, we give them a fair price. We do what we say we're going to do, but we acquire basically direct from consumer, and that's how we buy.
Who do you send the mailings out to?
We have okay. So we have 55,000 targets here in Richmond. The Richmond MSA is about 1.3. So we have a data scientist who I talked to about an hour ago, and he and I put together a list. Now, we're not his only clients, but 150 clients around the US. But what he does is he takes all the data, he looks at it, says, these people are likely to sell to you, these aren't. So of the 1.3 million people in the MSA, we have 55,000 targets. We've gotten most of them, like you and me. We don't target us. We target other people who may have inherited, or the person's a certain age. Like, he puts everything through all these unbelievable filters. Now, it's still a lot of miss, but it works a lot. So it's an inexact science. The internet is different. The internet is basically Domino's Pizza mails you a flyer. You go, great, and you throw it in a drawer. The internet works like this. I want a pizza. I'm going online, and I don't stop until I've ordered a pizza. That's how it is on our side of the business. So what we do, if it's an internet lead, one of our salespeople's phone will ring 24/7 with that lead. I get them on the phone with them immediately. I think if it's after a certain hour, it goes to a call center like 11 o'clock at night, but usually it goes directly to their phone. And then if you're calling to sell, they pick up the phone, start asking questions. They're like, look, I'm out of the office. It's 11. But what I'll do is I'll call you first thing tomorrow morning, and you don't need to call anybody else. I'm your guy. I'm going to buy the house. We satisfy the need immediately, and we get them. Those are great leads. because usually someone's hair is on fire and they usually come in the middle of the night. But that's kind of how we generate our leads. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Is that clear?
Yeah.
All right. So when I was talking earlier about the economy versus my economy, I used to run a profit center for Ryan Homes. I did it for about 3 years. In June of 05, we did 400 units a year. We're doing almost 180 million a year in sales revenue. We had 75 employees. The company as a whole had 60 divisions, 6 billion in sales, and around 3,800 employees. Fast forward 3 years, we were decimated on units. We went down to about a third of the revenue, and my employees got cut by a quarter. So, or 3/4. So if you look at it from that perspective, like literally it went like this, it constricted, and the company followed suit right along with it. So most people say conventional wisdom was that the market started to stop in 2008. But I think if you think the market started to stop in 2008, you're way too late. And I point to June 1st of 2005 in the DC metro market where it started. So DC kind of led last time. It was really overinflated. So what I wanted to make sure of, I mentioned earlier that I didn't have the same billion dollars that NVR had. I wanted to be ahead of the market and be able to realize, all right, what are the triggers? What are the things that start to happen to make sure that, you know, we're when the tide goes out, we're well covered. So most people say Stearns was first in 08. So 6 months later, Lehman Brothers went. 10 days later, Washington Mutual went, and 8 days after that was TARP. So it, like, you can just start to see the domino fell. Took about 6 months. The second domino fell, 10 days, 8 days, and like all hell broke loose inside of about 3 weeks. So what I was talking about earlier is getting ahead of that curve. That's one of the reasons we study this internally, and it's one of the reasons I'm networked nationally. I want to see it. So here's another one. Where are we in the cycle? Usually there's 18-year cycles. If you say 2008 was the last cycle down, usually 18 years later is 2026, but using what we just talked about, if 05 was the last down, usually about 2023 is the time. So what I think is we still have some runway ahead of us, but we're preparing for the rainy day now. And I'm going to show you what that looks like in a minute. So here are all the factors. We talked about a lot of them. Increasing in unsold inventory, vacancy rates, occupancy, construction stops or it slows drastically. And it's usually people are chasing the draw, even if they're not capitalized well during that process. There's some kind of global unrest, which little rocket man with his finger on the pulse or on the trigger, who knows? That could, like September 11th, change the market in an hour. So loan mix. Now, how long have you been in banking?
Almost 4 years.
Did you ever do mortgages, or were you ever overseeing that side of the business?
Yeah, I've always been in banking. So I've done more commercial
Okay.
than I've done residential.
Okay.
But I've done that.
But if you talk to the folks at your bank or at other banks, did you ever pay attention to the loan mix and what it looked like? Like, for example, in 2005, do you know what the percentage of conventional versus government loans was? Okay. Ballparking, conventional loans were about 90% and government loans were under 10. I think they were actually about 4%, but I'll say under 10 to give myself some safety, margin of safety. Do you remember the, basically with money, my friends and I joke and call it the money for skunk beer program, but when the government stimulated car sales and then they stimulated house purchases, do you remember what government loans were then, the mix? It was almost 70% government loans. So I think you can see what is and what is not a healthy market if you just pay attention to what's the loan mix. So that's one of the things that we track. Right now, it's a pretty healthy mix. It's about 60-40. And the average...
60-40 conventional.
Yeah. And the other side of it is the average credit score today, I'm doing this from memory, it's in my book. I think it's 680 is the average credit score today, where 10 years ago, the average credit score was 580. Most borrowers now are over 700, where 10 years ago they were in the sixes. So how we're underwriting is much stronger. So what I think is going to happen is there's going to be some kind of a shift outside of real estate. It's going to negatively impact real estate because the broader market will impact real estate, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be real estate led by everyone I listen to. But that's something we pay attention to. Clearly, affordability is important, and so too is unemployment. But here in Richmond, we're in a healthy kind of a role with jobs. So this part of the presentation picks up, and this is where the pictures start. So the fix and flip side of the business kind of looks like this. we buy a house like this. Now, if I gave Eddie houses like this every time, Eddie would have a hell of a lot more fun at work. This is a dream. Like, we get them in much worse shape than this. But this was a long-term rental. Bought this off the MLS. A realtor called me and said, hey, this guy's had 2 contracts fall out. There's some issues with the house. I know what his bottom line is. I was like, I'll pay 10 grand less than his bottom line. And I got it. This is what we turned it into. So, as I mentioned earlier, there used to be a time where this was amazing. Now there's 300 shows on TV where people do the same thing. So it's not rocket science. We're not creating Facebook. We're flipping houses.
Yeah.
But the upside of it is this is in Churchill. There's a market that we understand, and there's buyers that are there. And if you give them a well-renovated product, boom, you can sell it pretty fast. Here's the sales story, which is the best part. We had it under construction. Someone walked in and saw it. They actually saw the wall that we were building. We pre-sold it. And we only had renderings to show them, so we did, but we pre-sold it 376 grand, which was just over $200 a foot. And at the time, that was a record. There's one of our competitors was literally across the street, brand new construction. He was getting 203 a foot. So what we're really good at is taking old property, fixing them up, but then we create an emotional connection with the buyer, and that helps us drive the price up. We usually target a discretionary first-time or discretionary first-time move-up buyer intentionally. Number one, the neighborhoods in Richmond, kind of yuppie-ish kind of communities where people are moving to. In a lot of instances, that's kind of the price point. But we have a lot of the folks that will move here will live at home or they'll rent until their early 30s. And in a lot of instances, they partner off, late 20s, early 30s. They can afford a $300,000, $350,000 house. So it's a pretty good spot. In addition to that, loans, the government loans are just challenging. It's hard to close them. It gives a lot of restrictions on the amount of time I had to own it before I can sell it. So there's all these things that you look at and say, that is just not a place that we want to play a lot. So we usually stay right in this pool. Here's another one. And I talked about our long-term follow-up program. This guy wanted 120 grand. 18 months before it was worth 120 grand. 18 months later, it was finally worth it. That's when I bought it. Turned it into this. And now I was talking about the emotional connection. This is what Eddie and Tim and our other construction folks do. They build us a hell of a house. Then we have a stager who goes in and furnishes it. And the reason we do this on every single home is we want to have emotional connection. And if you and your family are actually in the home, we want you to have a place to sit. We want you to talk. We want you to move yourself in mentally. It costs us about $2 grand. We get that money back because we sell quickly. And not only do we sell quickly, we usually get more than we ask for the home. In this instance, this was on a bad block. It's across the street from a drugstore. And I'm not talking like CVS. I'm talking like Smack and Blow and like right there and like hookers. It's a bad block. And then to the right is subsidized housing. And it's nasty. So I was nervous. I didn't want to buy it. And I finally bought it. So what I said was the realtor and I were talking. We thought it was worth about 310, 315. It's like Richmond's a smart enough place. They're going to realize a sale. So what we did is we listed at 290, 289, 990. It went live on Monday. All the pictures, staging, everything was in there. And I wouldn't even give the realtor the key until Sunday morning. Sunday morning, he put the key in the lockbox, went up to the house, held it open. We had about 75 people through the home. We had 7 contracts on it. We went back with the highest and best. We went from 290 to 325. And I think the people closed in like 20-something days. But then we had, when you have 7 offers, you have 6 losers. So we went back to the 6 people who lost, and we said, look, we have other inventory in and around. Would you like to get into a bidding war again, or would you like to pre-buy from us? And like, we'd love to pre-buy from you. We showed them the inventory. We set a margin. We set our price. And it was, so we don't pre-build because it causes a lot. We don't pre-sell because it takes a lot more staff, and you've got to manage customers. But we'll, at the drywall or later stage, we'll pre-sell some of our product. And that's what we did there. We made strong margins on all of them. So what I want you to realize is, we understand how to build it, how to flip it. We also know how to control the market to a point of getting unbelievably strong returns, because that's how I was corporately trained. When I say wholesale with real estate, what do you think of?
Wholesale. Just,
Almost liquidation, right?
yeah.
Yeah. So what wholesale is, the way that I define it, and most people in the market spell it with an I, it basically, we take one of our mail pieces, we get something under contract. This one we got under contract for 75 grand. We ended up taking it to the market at 95,000. Now we have a buyer's list of about 14,000 names. So we get a house under contract, and it gives us the right to inspect it and possibly sell it. we take it to the list. Our list will react. Either they do nothing, which means they don't like it, or they call. And they'll call our individual sales rep up and say, I would like to see this home. Perfect. I think 4 or 5 people showed up at this house. We got 4 offers on it, and the person was willing to pay $100,000. I had a $500 refundable deposit. I never took ownership. I collected a $25,000 fee at closing. That's it. So there's almost no risk, and I get it under contract with my ways and means of collecting it. I take it to the broader market. You already buy it. I collect a fee. I have no risk.
You're selling it to other folks.
Yeah. Now we're going to do about 50 of those this year. Now what I do, you guys have committee meetings or loan meetings? Okay. So I realized a couple of years ago that you guys do this, and it's smart, right? You sit around a room, you talk about deals, you talk about it, with the higher ups and everything. So our team goes out and analyzes every single deal. They'll put it under contract. They can put it under contract without asking me. But what I want to do is physically review all the deals. The reason is I think I'm pretty good at real estate, number 1, and number 2, this controls my fortune. So if you get something under contract or you have a lead in front of you, I want to know about it. I might have an idea of what to do with it or what's the best idea. In a lot of instances, I see value where others don't, especially like if you're going to bring me a house that's burned out, but half the house is still there and I can buy it for 10 grand, like a picture I'm going to show you in a minute. Like, I'm going to buy that house. Like, I don't care where it is. Like, the cost of resources is 3 times the purchase price. Like, I'm not that smart, but I can figure that out. So those are the kind of things, but I want to see all of the deals, and that's how we have our business set up. This one, we had a number on it. If we could get at least 20 grand, we were just going to take the 20 grand. If we couldn't get the 20 grand, we're going to do the work. I would send Eddie and Tim out, they do the work, and then we sell it on the market later. But if we can make at least 40% right now of what we can buy it, fix it, and flip it for, we just take the profit and move. But that's kind of our study. So right now, I think we're in the expansion mode, but we're prepared for hyper supply. And this is an example what even during a period that we weren't in hyper supply, this is a great example. This house is across from Westwood Pharmacy. It's on the Henrico Richmond border, right off of Patterson. Does that help you? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, we're right on.
All right. So right there, like, I lived in Charlottesville when we did this deal. I didn't even know where the hell it was. Like, I didn't realize how great it was. Like, in retrospect, I probably would have kept it, but oh well. Initially, we had under contract for 75. And my project manager at the time goes, I think we could do the work for 80. There, as Tim likes to say, there was termites holding hands. There's no way in hell we were going to do the work for 80 grand. Plus, we didn't have the staff that we have now then. I got the seller. I said, look, I can't pay 75. I can pay 65, or I got a release. They gave me the 65 grand. I said, perfect, I'll buy the house. I didn't have 14,000 people on my buyers list at the time. I think I had like 8. So I used some of my money, private money. I bought the house with the private money. I took it down, and I had a contractor go out, not the smartest human being on earth. He's like, what do you want me to do? I'm like, I'm going to give you $1,000, order a dumpster, show up at the house, take all the trash out of the house, first floor, the second floor, the yard, everywhere. And I want you to go back in the house. I want you to bring your leaf blower. And I want you to turn the leaf blower on when you're inside the house, and just turn the leaf blower on and start blowing. And like, when all the dust is outside and it looks relatively clean, close the windows on the second floor, go down to the first floor, do the same thing. Close all the windows, turn off your leaf blower, go outside and turn around and look at the house. And when you look at the house, it looks like it just sneezed. You did a great job. Like, that's what a good job looks like. We listed it at $69,990, owned it for 4 days. We had 41 offers. Someone offered 106. We accepted 101 grand. I owned it for 17 days. So we call that the sneeze house. We made just under 30 grand. Now, 4 years ago, 30 grand was an amazing deal. We have wholesale deals or deals like this now that we've done this year. We make 60, 70, 80 grand on some of them. Literally, I do nothing but put it back on the market. I just pitched one today that we might make like 125 on. So the market's getting to that euphoric stage, but we also are better at buying things, understanding what the right buy price is, and realizing, hey, this is in a pretty remarkable area. If we're not going to hold it, we can sell it, make a pretty nice fee. So that's what the wholesale model is. Our rental business is this. We own, this is about 3 months old, and that number's off. We probably own closer to 175 doors now. But we have a bunch funded with Union. We have 50 plus in the refi process with United and with CNF Bank. And then we have a couple of other banking relationships where we're looking to park some of our rentals. Our renewal rate is greater than 90% on our rentals. We have about 70 people physically paying us rent right now. I have an incentive in place for our property manager where if they have to rent the house, before month 13, they have to do it for me for free, which basically means they need to be there for at least 2 years. I want a fiscally qualified tenant. I want someone who's going to take care of the home, and I want someone who's going to stay. What we try and do with homes is there's home ownership pride or pride in ownership. There's pride in rentership too. In a lot of instances, what we do is rent through Section 8, like 90% plus of our deals are through Section 8, but our average rent is about 121% of market rent. The government subsidizes, the tenant pays some, and it's a dance and a game. But the people who are getting the subsidy know that if they don't pay us rent and we report them, which we're not going to do it erroneously, but if they don't pay or they're bad tenants, we'll evict them. And if we have to evict them, they lose their voucher. So these people play the game. They stay in the home. They do a good job of keeping the homes in decent shape, and they live there for a very long time. So our goal is to mitigate monthly expense, and our goal is to keep them in the home as long as humanly possible by providing a good product that they can be prideful of. So those are the numbers that you see. Our average portfolio debt service cover is about 165%. So I don't know if that's good or bad for you, but most people tell me it's pretty damn good. Now those numbers, I got a couple in our portfolio that are over 300, a handful over 200, but as we're starting to buy into a bit of an appreciating market, 150, 160, we can get some of those. And the other thing we're doing is we have a very stout portfolio now. If I see something in the fan that I want that has a debt service cover of 0.9, I'm going to buy it because I have the portfolio where I can blend it. The numbers still work, but at the same time, it's a long-term hold in an area that I think is going to appreciate over time. But it still cash flows now. It just doesn't have the really rich returns. But that's one of the nice things about having a portfolio is most of our stuff is obnoxious. And you can have a couple of like ground out singles to first in there as well because they're in locations that you like.
What's your expense ratio?
When you say that, I don't know.
Like relative to rent, what are your annual expenses?
That's a statistic I don't have on recall, but we usually spend, it's usually around 7.5% over the course of the year. So what we do I'm going to show you some pictures. What we do is we do almost all of our work up front. I was mentioning we had 70 units. 2 months ago with 70 units rented, our rental repairs that month was under $1,000. So it's really, really low. What we try and do is do all the expensive stuff up front and keep our numbers down. Now I learned that by not doing it that way and having enormously high expense ratios, but I keep it down. If you want, I can get you the actual number. But
I'm curious, we do a fair amount of single family rentals.
Okay.
And where we're a little bit on the conservative side, we'll assume an operating expense ratio of 25 to 30%. Which is
you say 25 to 30
of rent.
Okay.
So
$1,000, you say $300 every month is dedicated towards maintenance and repairs.
Yeah.
We're under that.
Yeah. But we'll underwrite to that,
sure,
so that there's some cushion.
Yeah.
And that does give us, some folks that are running a little tighter.
Mm-hmm.
It creates an issue with them. It doesn't sound like that would be.
Some deals might,
Yeah.
but by and large, they don't. Like a typical deal for us, we'll buy a house, be into it for it's called 75 grand, which is high. Okay, 75 grand is going to paper out to about, let's call it 560 a month, and I'm renting that for 1,100, 1,200.
Okay.
So if it's at 1,100, you're going to subtract 300 from that, so you're at 780. 780 over 560. Yeah, those are our deals. Pretty normal.
Okay.
So here's a great one. Now this we bought it right. It's in Lakeside. Bought it for 103. I try not to sell anything in Lakeside. I think it's a great area, and I think it's just on the rise. And there's not a lot of it. And who we rent to in each area is different. This is one of our non-Section 8 tenants, but they don't call us. They leave us the hell alone. They've been there for a while. We raised their rent 3% annually. That's it. Just keep them in the house. But we bought it for 103. We put 2,000 into it. It appraised at 150. We got a 75% loan on it. It rents for 1,300. Our gross cover is 155%. Like knock that one over the head with a rubber hose and do it all day long if you can. But they're not all like that. This one is more typical. Now I could show you the befores. This thing was a mess. 36 grand. We put 60 into it. It appraised for 160. We borrowed 70% of that. When I put this slide together, we were at 1236 in rent because it was their second year and they got raised 3%. But it's 158% gross cover. Now this is on purpose. This is up in it's in Henrico County. It basically is 9 Mile Road, 25th Street, Churchill. So if you're 2 miles away, you could be down to the Jefferson. But this is kind of in the path of progress. When I bought this house, it's probably worth 125, 140 grand. It's probably worth 175 2 years later. But it papers out. But it's one of those ones that we're just going to hold on to for a while. And then every now and again, we just say, hey, you know what? We want to fatten the profits a little bit. We'll sell one. So we do that, but then we pay cap gains tax for now. And we keep kind of spiraling. This is a pretty typical one. Now, this is on Lenmore, and I actually own 5 houses on this exact block. This was our first one. 32 grand we bought it for. We put 13,000 in it. It appraised for 68, $1,200 a month. This is what it looked like when we bought it. Now, we can do this relatively inexpensively. It needed windows, it needed a roof, it needed HVAC, it needed a bunch of paint. But we buy direct as a distributor on our HVAC. So we get the units for cheap. We have crews that do, 3 HVAC jobs a week for us. So it's on the cheap. That's probably 25, 30 grand worth of work in the market. For us, it's less. We have 2 guys who are roofers who are literally $20 an hour each. They're the cheapest roofers in the world. We put them on the roof. We buy the shingles direct. We can do an entire roof with architectural shingles for $1,200. Like, they're going to charge you $5. So, I mean, those are the little things that we do to force value. This is it after. Now, these are not my favorite pictures. I actually think they're kind of ugly, but 315% gross cover is not ugly. So I keep it in here. That's a good one. But what we've done is new cabinets, new paint. We bulletproof the showers, as you can see. Like, they can't screw that up. We put in tile. This one doesn't have a tile backsplash. We start putting tile backsplashes in all of our homes. It's actually cheaper to put in a tile backsplash than have these people get grease all over the back walls and have to come back and service it. So we just put tile up. And then we have our maintenance crews go in at least twice a year, usually 4 times a year, check the grout, check the backsplashes. They just, hit it with caulk and paint. They're there for 90 minutes, make sure the filters are changed, move on to the next one. That's what we do. So I call this the mullet house. This is on Coles, and it's a mullet house because it's business in the front and party in the back. It's kind of cute, but then you get around back and it's a disaster. Inside, it was missing walls and all kinds of stuff. We bought it for $27,000. We put 38 into it, appraised it at 82.5, $1,100 a month. This is it after the fact. Now, we build this like a factory. Every home we inherit is in different shape. Like, sometimes it's got beautiful granite. It's got ugly granite sometimes, but it's got granite that's still serviceable. It might have cabinets that are in good shape. It might have carpet. It's got different stuff. So what we do is we have a plan with every house, but we're also not arrogant enough to think that it can only look like this. If the house already has some assets, we take advantage of those assets. We leave them there. We leave them in service. But if not, we finish it like this. We paint the cabinets either white or gray. We put in white appliances, and we do not put in a dishwasher or a disposal or a microwave. Those are 3 things that people break all the freaking time, and they can live without them because they do it every day. So we don't put any of those in the house. But when we go back and do the renovation, we plumb for and put the electrical stub up for the dishwasher. We do the same thing underneath the sink. We usually put a dovetail there and just cap it in case we ever wanted to put a disposal on. So we build it for the fact that someday we may want to renovate this home and sell it. We don't have to rip apart any walls. We've already done that work, and it's just tucked in nice and neat. And then if we want to convert it, we kick the tenant out or their lease expires. We take the hardwood floors. You can see them over there on the left. That's hardwood painted. It's just paint. It's deck paint with a seal. I know this works as a good sealant because I live in a house in the fan. It's 108 years old. When we sanded the floors, there was 8 layers of paint on it, and it was beautiful hard pine under there. So we just seal it. People love the floors. They put down their area rugs. They live on top of it, and it's freaking bulletproof. And if we ever want to sell it, that's the strategy. This is one of my all-time favorites. This was the $10,000 house. It's right up off of Gordon. So it's 3 minutes from Churchill, right in Henrico County on the other side of 64. It looked like this when we bought it for 10 grand, but it had a sewer tap. It had a water connection. It had a foundation, and it had some walls. What we did is we built we turned this into a box, and this is something, the reason we hired Eddie. Basically, this house is 24 by 22, but we built this for about $55 a foot. So Tim and I sat down, we developed a 30 by 30 box that we could build for under $60 a foot. And now we own about 50 lots in cash around the city. So what we're starting to do with Eddie's help is pick a few off, and we're going to just build those out throughout the year, stick tenants in it. If we need revenue, we can sell 1 or 2, but if not, we're going to just do this with it. But this is a great deal. It rents for $1,600 a month. It's a 259% gross cover, and it's brand new construction. And that's it after the fact. consulting and educated. Clearly, you can tell I like to talk. I get paid for this. I speak in front of a mastermind group 4 times a year. I facilitate, and my methodology with that was, as long as I can tell a compelling story and I can find someone who's interested in real estate that speaks English, I can figure out a way to make money. So that was my whole entire goal when I started, was just have this pet rock in my portfolio, and if I ever needed to dust it off, I could. So this looks familiar, but we changed the color for you to keep it fresh. But if you look at it, what we do inside of recovery, we're going to do this. We're going to add rentals, and we're going to flip houses in the best areas. Lakeside, the Fan, Churchill, places where we can predict, places where we currently own inventory that we bought, during this market. During the expansion phase, well, wholesalers have entered the market. So now that there's wholesalers in the market, we're going to sell them some stuff. They're not really around during the recession, so we're going to self-sustain, but this is the other side of it. In hyper supply, we're not going to be buying a bunch of rentals because people are overpaying for things. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to fix and flip in the best areas. We're going to buy houses, and then we're going to sell them to someone as a wholesale and just get them under contract and sell it, or we'll put it on the market and very quickly let the euphoric market overpay for something, take a profit, and move. We're also stacking cash. This is the period of the market where we are going to be very, very fiscally prudent. We're already fiscally prudent. We're already stacking cash, but that's where we're going to do it aggressively, because the dark night is coming. And then when it comes here, we want to buy a ton of rentals. And what we also want to do is just fix and flip in the best markets. So that's the entire strategy. How to participate, this is what we're basically looking for. Right now, we're capitalized a couple of different ways. I didn't have $1 billion when I left, but I had a couple of million when I left Ryan Homes. I put most of that into the business. I was the first investor. We had a couple of small banks. We have private investors. So we have our largest private investor is right under 8.5 million today that they have invested with us. Every single note is securitized by a piece of property. He's got a first deed of trust. He's the only deed of trust. He wires us the cash. I have a meeting with him tomorrow. Usually we sit down 3-4 times a year. It's the easiest situation ever. I overpay. I mean, I pay between 8 and 9% for that money, but literally I can accomplish a loan with a text message. I realize you have more restrictions, but we do have relationships with other banks. And usually what we do is some kind of 75-80% of purchase price, 75-80% of total value. We pay a rate, and that's what it is. On the other side, we have 3 rental facilities, but we're looking to grow those. And what that means is you say, Frank, here's our buy box, here's our parameters, here's where you need to be. And what I would like to know is the rules. And if you have an appetite, and if you do, what I like to do is just back up the truck with 10 or 15 in it, and then you underwrite it, and we perform, and we do it again. So that's kind of the thing that we've done in the past. So that's kind of the entire business in 45 minutes with a lot of me talking, which I apologize about, but kind of gives you a good perspective on this is what we do.
Okay, that's great. Very good. So just looking to add a bank, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Facility similar to what you have now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, from what we're striving for, exactly.
Okay.
I think we run a good business. I understand you have bosses and you have people you have to satisfy. What I like to do is start relatively small. Like, I'm not gonna say, hey, can we have 10 million?
Yeah.
Start with whatever you guys feel comfortable with. Make sure that I'm not full of shit. We're performing, we're paying our, if we have notes, we're paying everything. My one banker is pretty easy. He looks and he goes, well, I never had to call you because you were late on a mortgage payment. And every time I look at the balances, they're higher. So it seems like everything's going well. I'm guessing there's people in underwriting that actually study it more, but that's the goal.
Yeah.
So that's it. And what we try and do as a business is position ourselves. I mentioned a bunch of houses. Like this year alone, we're going to do right over 200 deals, which is a ton for 11 people. Like Tim and I haven't slept in months, but it's like we got a ton going on. But with those deals, what we did is we really tried to keep profitability at a certain point where when you look at my tax returns, you don't laugh, but you say, hey, this guy's well capitalized. He's making enough money. He's clearly paying his taxes. But fiscally, he's very well off. They've got X number of assets against a smaller amount of liabilities. And that's what we do. And then what we do throughout the course of the year, which Eddie's going to start to see, is we pluck off the smart ones. Like, hey, it might make sense. This one we bought for 68 grand. It could probably sell for 300 now. why don't we just pluck that one, sell it, take the $100,000 profit now, and in its place hold 4 other rentals with, you know, good strong numbers, 165% debt service cover. So that's the kind of thing that we try and make good strategic decisions around, and that's what we do.
How is it set up in terms of does Cava Capital own everything?
I've got a couple of different entities. Cava Capital is kind of the entity that does most of the acquisition and a lot of the work, and we're insured as such. Then I have a holding company that holds on to a lot of the rentals.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, everything is securitized and cross collateral. I mean, it's all like, I mean, I gotta personally sign everything.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's what usually banks are looking for. But that's the whole structure.
Okay.
Tim's a partner, but he's on a vesting schedule,
Okay.
and I'm 100% owner of everything right now.
And so who are you working with on the banking side now? Union, you said.
Union, United, CNF are local. Colony and Genesis Capital are both national.
Okay.
You know them, or have you heard of them?
I've heard of them.
So the news you might have heard about Genesis is they were just bought by Goldman like 6 weeks ago.
Okay.
But they've got 1.8 billion. So in a lot of instances, they got a lot of paperwork. But in a lot of instances, what we'll do with them is I'll finish a house, or I'm waiting for something to get refinanced with the local bank, and I'll just take 15 of them to them and park it in a facility that paid it. It's like 6 and 1. So it's not the cheapest money in the world, but it's relatively inexpensive, and I can recycle my other cash.
Okay.
That's what we do.
Now the 200 deals that we did this year, how does that break down among this 4 months? Well, that's, I guess it'll be the 3 months.
So this is going to be roughly accurate. 100 of the 200 we held as rentals. About 20 to 25, so about 12.5% are lots. 25% are wholesales, get under contract, sold to somebody else, and the balance, right around 40 units we bought, fixed, flipped. So what we're doing is we're actually running our business on about 35%, 30 to 35% of our inventory. We're keeping 60 to 65% of our inventory for long-term hold, which it can get lean because I'm trying to hold on to as much as possible.
Right.
At the end of the year, I'm like, I want to make sure we made money, but at the same time, I want to hold on for long-term.
Okay.
That's okay.
That's sort of the ratio for now.
That makes sense. We're a small business. We literally got 11 employees. You met half of them when you walked in here. But we also, so I worked at NVR, which I think, I speak highly of them. I learned a lot there. Their corporate counsel is our corporate counsel. He's worked with them for 30-something years, and clearly they pay him more than I do. But the moral of the story with him is he knows how to take businesses and help them grow. He makes the majority of his money actually selling builders. So he sells builders all around the country. So he's basically a mergers and acquisitions attorney for real estate. So I've been working with him for about 4 years, and he's really smart. I ask him a lot of questions, and I tell him when I have problems. And he's like, here's some guidance. He guided me to bring in a fractional CFO. So we actually found someone who is retired from Dominion Power, and now they're Dominion Energy. He was in here this morning for 4 hours. So Denise used to be our bookkeeper, and we would, basically use a bunch of cocktail napkins to figure out what the hell we were doing. Now I got a guy that was with a publicly traded company who ran an audit division for 30 years, overseeing our books. So from someone who's got 11 employees and basically looks like they run out of the back of a spaceship, what we actually have is we try to be fairly well sophisticated. And it costs me money to have him and we're getting into this. We don't have it yet. But 18, we're going to do quarterly audits with an auditor. So you can see, here's our books. He's produced them. He signed off on them. It cost me 7 times as much to do my books, but you got good understanding that these guys are actually doing what they say. So we're trying to grow fiscally responsibly.
Okay. Makes sense.
What other questions?
I think probably, I'd love if you could send this to me. That's
Sure.
helpful.
I'll have it to you before you're in the car.
And let me kind of soak all of this in and get back to you with kind of, the normal, the questions and the information that you've already read on the past.
Yeah.
But I typically like to kind of soak it all in and then get back to you. Here's what I mean. Or for some reason, like, wait a second, I don't know if I can do this.
Yeah.
Have that discussion. And your time frame, I assume, is sooner rather than later, but it's not.
We're fine.
You've got sources.
I mean, yes. We're looking to grow, but I mean, I realize we've got to go through a process, and it's probably going to happen by Friday.
Yeah.
So
That's interesting. I mean, I wish I was actually looking at the numbers. We had a strategy meeting yesterday. I forgot the numbers, but we have a pretty big portfolio of rentals from our Franklin Federal. Cava came into the market, bought Franklin Federal, and we still do a fair amount of that. But nothing like you guys are doing. It's more smaller guys here and there, or it's not as sophisticated as what you guys are doing. So it's interesting. It'll take a different approach on our part.
my goal when I started this business, I had a couple of goals. I had some money, I didn't want to lose it. I also didn't want to go build one spec house and compete against everybody else, right? So I looked at this space, and this space was a lot more fragmented 10 years ago when I started in it. Now Wall Street's here, and nationally there's a lot of players, but I feel like we compete extremely well against most of our normal competition. Like the Wall Street boys kick our ass. They're metrics out, they got more money, and they can do things bigger and faster. But what we are able to do is kind of take the hybrid approach of a business that's basically been run out of the back of a truck for 50 years and put some corporate structure around it. And that's what we've tried to do. And I am not conservative in how I dress. I wear skinny jeans and I'm 240 pounds, but I'm really conservative when I look at deals. I'm very, very conservative with, is this a good deal or not? Can we lose our ass? We'll pass. Like we had a deal that we were looking at that we were thrilled about. It's on Buying Street down in the Fan. And I thought it was an awesome deal. We were about to buy it. The guy did something to change the fundamentals of the deal, and I'm out. Like, I don't need it. I don't need to lose 50 grand to prove to you that I can do a deal. Like, my goal is I want to make money, and I want to stay in business. And I've got 11 employees that I need to think about. So
on your flips, what's your typical margin?
So when you calculate margin, everything into this number include everything except overhead. So principal, interest, taxes, insurance, carrying costs, everything. We usually average between 15 and 17.5% sales price. So our average is right around, it's just under 50 grand is what we usually average. And there's usually enough healthy margin in there.
I've been with the bank for 5 years in April. I was actually on Suffolk for a little bit, but I'm from Richmond, so we bought Franklin Federal. Suffolk is nice. My wife's from down this way. But anyway, one of my clients in Newport News, a guy named Roger McClellan, they did similar, not as sophisticated, but they were, in 2014 was my last year with them. They did about 75,000 or something like that. I just remember that their goal was 15 gross margin.
15%. Yeah.
But they didn't get there. That was the goal.
There's different houses. Like if you get into the higher price point, like San Diego's this way, right? So there's friends of mine that are in San Diego. They literally flip for 4% profit. But 4%, it's an enormous number when you're selling an $800,000 house. But I think that is something that really could be negatively impacted by just a slight uptick in the market from a recession, or a downtick in the market from a recession. So we like to be in a healthy range. Yeah, that's the goal.
Well, like I said, this sounds like a very intriguing opportunity. I'd love to roll my sleeves up and see if we can help.
Cool.
And getting the presentation and getting back to you with here's the stuff that I need, which will be a couple of years financials, personal statement, personal tax returns, all the stuff that you.
We got the